Hi, I'm Carol Strake. I'm a professor at U of T, and I'm also the president of the Canadian Association of HIV Researchers. Today, I'm going to talk to you about writing and publishing in the scientific research. Before I tell you about what I'm going to speak to you about today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about me as a writer, because that's how I approach this presentation. For me, writing has always been a challenge for me in terms of getting the work done, trying to think through, my argument and the like. I'm a procrastinator. I'm an avoider about writing. I revised this presentation to avoid writing. I've completed courses about writing. I've read books about writing. I've sought help about writing. And despite the challenges I have experienced, I have managed to publish in the literature. So to date, I have 166 peer-reviewed scientific articles. I got a PhD in 20,000. And I've had 110 of those since 2010. And I point that out now, just keep it in mind because I'm going to come back to why I'm pointing that out later in the presentation. I also have 40 gray literature reports that I'll also tell you why that's important. Importantly, I've improved my output in writing by writing with people who write. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as a writer. So why do we write? Well, writing and research are intertwined. Writing is essential to research, and writing is a skill that can be learned and improved. So my writing is improved over time. But as I said, writing can be a struggle. Silva, in his 2007 book, says, writing is a grim business, much like repairing a sewer or running a mortuary. Writing is hard, which is why so many of us do so little of it. But Silva's book is about how to write a lot, which tells you that you can improve not only the quality, but the quantity of your writing. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about why should we publish? I'm going to talk about how to select the type of article you want to write, how to select a journal, how to develop a habit, how to write particular parts of articles, how to respond to reviewers, writing for gray literature, I'll talk a little bit about writing for theses and dissertations, and I'll provide you with some resources and references that you might want to return to at some point. The content is based on literature about writing, my experiences, and those of some of my colleagues, just so you know where I pulled some of my material from. So why publish? Well, there's lots of reasons to publish, and they include in broad categories to survive, to thrive, and to have impact. So if you think about surviving in an academic or a research career, we write because that's part of what's considered the currency of the realm, or what might be called publish or perish. So you can increase your success in an increasingly competitive academic market by publishing. It's one of the metrics on which we are judged. Publishing is also essential for tenure and promotion if you go down an academic path with your career. Although, not everybody goes down that path. They may choose other rewarding opportunities. Why also do we publish? Well, to thrive. A lot of us come into research because we're interested in the topics. We're curious. We want to know the answers. So writing helps satisfy a sense of curiosity, putting all the pieces of a puzzle together to tell a story. It helps us feel fulfilled and also accomplished that, all the effort that we put into a project can be put together and of use to somebody else, right? It can improve your chances of promotion, which is related to surviving. And writing can also help you create new opportunities, right? For collaborations and for positions in higher status institutions. The more you write, the more you may draw attention. For me, I force myself to write to have impact, right? I'm interested in harm reduction research. And when I started my independent career as a scientist about 20 years ago, there was some literature about harm reduction. That's changed quite a lot in the past 2 decades. But, I wrote to have impact, to bring what I knew and what I learned with community about harm reduction programs to the literature. And to other venues so that other people could learn how to design their harm reduction programs, how to improve their harm reduction programs and the like. So, you know, you may write to have impact, you may write to advance knowledge, and you also may write to establish yourself as a credible and respected scholar. One of my mentors once said to me that failure to publish was unethical. And I've often wondered if that's an overly strong statement, but if you think about where your funding comes from and from the need for a lot of the knowledge that we produce, perhaps it's not the strongest statement ever. So there's lots of reasons to write, and you think, okay, so what do I write? Is my only option a journal article? You know, it has an introduction, a methods, a results, a discussion. That's kind of the general format. Well, there's all kinds of different articles that you can write. And you might write different articles at different times because you have different messages to send, or you're at different points in your career. So when COVID started, the first lockdown last spring, there were all kinds of opportunities to write commentaries. What was this pandemic going to mean for HIV research, people living with HIV prevention, or in my other world of harm reduction, you know, what would the COVID-19 restrictions mean for people who use drugs, their access to needle and syringe programs, or methadone and the like. And so that was, I participated in more commentaries than I had in the rest of my career. So there's that kind of article. There's the traditional article that I was saying, the research article, intro, methods, or, you know, methods, results and discussion, sometimes conclusion. The subsections may change depending on the journal. There's large articles, there's brief articles, there's also systematic reviews. You can write letters to the editor. Sometimes you're invited to write a response to a journal article. And I provided two different, so I show the American Journal of Public Health and also the BMJ to show you that there are all kinds of different types of journal articles. And you might think about, like, what is it I want to write about and what journal article fits the best? Or you might want to think, okay, I've written this research article. Is there a way to use what I've learned in writing that article or doing that project in another way and writing another publication to reach another audience for another purpose, right? So you might think about it that way. So you not only have to pick the type of article you want to write, you want to create also a list of journals. So the type and the list of journals will be important to think about together, right? Because different journals offer different types of articles. Or you might say, I want to write a commentary, so I'm only going to look for journals that allow me to write a commentary. Or I want to write a brief report, so I'm only going to look for journals that may allow me to submit a brief report. So how do you find journals? Well, you can check the reference lists of the articles that you are reading for your manuscript. You can ask your mentors where they publish and why, and they may have some insider knowledge, you know, like maybe they've, you know, submitted to this article and they took, you know, 12 months to review it, or this journal is a, you know, a fast reviewer, or that doesn't really, you know, your idea is a great idea, but doesn't suit that journal because they publish mostly manuscripts about whatever, right? So that's why a mentor can provide you with some important insight. You might look for special calls. They tend to have a higher success rate. I'll talk about success later with journal articles. But, you know, there might be an opportunity that comes your way that you see they're looking for articles about a particular topic, and, you know, you have what they're looking for. There are a number of tools you can use. I've given you some hyperlinks to help you find, you put in some keywords and they pop out the journals that are interested in your kind of content. You might want, you know, you have to think about how those tools work, and they're, you know, produced by publishers. So they're only going to suggest journals within their list. Then you might want to, you have your list, you might analyze the appropriateness of the journals on your list. You check the scope, does it fit? Is that your target audience? And is it the type of article that you want to write? Is that allowable? And you want to prioritize the list and keep all that are suitable. So why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you just pick one and move on? Because there's a high percentage chance that you may not get in your first journal that you pick once you've submitted. So you may be very successful and get your article in that first journal, but if you don't want to have to go through this process again. And so in my own with my own team, what we do is we usually have a list of our top forward journals, and if we're unlucky with the first, we go down the list. I think the worst experience I ever had was I had to go to number 5 on the list. And that was earlier in my career. And by then I was just determined I was going to get it published because it was a good article, and we were lucky on the 5th go. So I'm wondering, for those of you watching this, who puts writing into their schedule and how often? That was something I never, ever did until I read that Silva book about putting it in my schedule. Maybe I put it in some ways, but it wasn't a regular kind of thing. So it's important, if you want to write and you want to write consistently and you want to improve your output, to schedule it in your calendar. It's as important as teaching. It's as important as going to class. One of the things so scheduling is important, but there are a number of other things that help you be successful in academic or research writing. And there are a bunch. I provided a list of some of the references I use for this, but there's divergent advice. So some academics are successful because they write daily, others write sporadically. Some write at home, some write at work. Some on trains, planes, at children's sports practices, others in, almost, monastic surroundings with no distractions of the physical or, the auditory nature. Some use word processors, some, write whenever they have a few minutes free. A colleague of mine was just saying the other day that, she writes in 10-minute bursts. I was like, wow, how do you accomplish anything? But it works for her. And she has, writes quite a lot. Some map out detailed outlines before they start writing, and some just start writing. So what does that all mean? It seems like conflicting advice. It means you need to find your practice of writing. So as Sword says, for the vast majority of successful academics, writing is neither a daily routine or a rare occurrence, neither an immovable constant nor a random event. Writing is the work that gets done in the interstices between teaching and office hours and faculty meetings and administration and all the other messy, sprawling demands of academic life. So you need to find the habit that works for you as a writer. And your habit will change over time, right? As your life changes, as your responsibilities change. So as I started this presentation, I mentioned that writing is a skill that you hone and exercise. And that's really true. For me, I think it's important to schedule writing into your calendar, despite all the things on the previous slides said that, people have different habits, but it's a good way to start. Decide how much time you have or you want to devote to your writing, and divide it up into days or hours, right? And figure out what's going to work and when it's going to work. And you need to protect your writing time. So protecting your writing time can mean many things. It can mean making sure that if you don't control your own calendar, that whoever does control your calendar can't put appointments in at that time. I take care of my own calendar. It would mean, it can also mean turning off your phone. It can mean turning off whatever other distractions there are on their computer. It can mean closing the door, depending on. So, it's important to protect your time in a variety of different ways. And you might want to experiment with different writing schedules. So if you're kind of stuck and you have been, setting aside, 5-hour blocks of time, maybe that isn't working for you for a variety of reasons. Maybe you need 5 blocks of 1 hour, right? Just mix it up until you figure out what helps you get to the point of writing. And I forget, I'm not sure if it was Silva or Sword that said, write at a time that feels wrong. So if I actually like to write in the morning, but sometimes if I'm struggling, I schedule something at the end of the day. Sometimes that works for me. So it's about developing your habit. Silva talks a lot about removing specious barriers. And I remember the first time I read his book, I was like, oh, what do you mean? Of course I feel inspired to write. Well, he says you don't actually, and that's a specious barrier. And I think, since I've read that book, it's been a few years since I read that book, I've come to appreciate what he has to say about writing and specious barriers. And those include things like, I don't have time, I need to find more time. Well, maybe you could schedule, 15 minutes here or there, or 30 minutes, right? You probably do have time. You just haven't set aside the time. I need to do more analyses, which may be true, but you can also get trapped in doing more analyses, or I'm going to search the literature. I'm going to search for some more literature, right? I need a better computer. I need a better printer. I need to read more. I need to feel inspired. I can't until I'm stuck, right? And Silva says, you need to get rid of all of those excuses and just figure out a way to write and not get stuck. So where do you start when you're writing an article, right? Some may say that you start with a title. I never start with a title, and it's probably, you can waste so much time trying to craft the most perfect title, right? Because you don't really know what the title of your article is going to be until you've written the whole article. And then you can go back and say, well, what the heck is this about, right? And what fits as a title, right? So I always say, start with the methods and the results. Next, focus on the introduction, the discussion, and the conclusion. And last, write the abstract and the title. And I'll talk a little bit more about writing the abstract in a few slides. So what do you write in a method section? Very disciplinary specific, and also journal specific, and the subheadings may be very specific to the journal. So you need to read the instructions for the authors and figure out, and also read some of the articles in a journal and figure out how do people write their methods section, right? And fit your content into the style and the structure of the journal. So you want to make sure that you write in a way that conveys the rigorous conduct of your research. You want to write enough detail that you can reproduce it. You want to address ethical issues, and you want to provide citations for all methods, approaches, tools, analytic procedures, or therapeutics, or whatever is appropriate for your article, and you put those in the methods section. If there are multiple publications for a study, sometimes you can have the first article that has one big method section that covers all the nitty-gritty details, and then you cite this, that article for detail in subsequent publications. Some journals like that, some journals hate that, so you can figure out whether that's going to be suitable or not if you're on a big study with a lot of publications. One of the things I do with my own studies is I overwrite the methods section in the proposal as soon as our data collection is finished. So I do field-based research. We collect data using structured and semi-structured interviews. We also do some site visits and the like, and like field observations. So what we do is when we're done data collection, we go back through the proposal and rewrite every nitty-gritty little decision we made about data collection along the way. And then it's in place. We never have to worry that we've forgotten how we did what we did. We then use that later to condense for a journal article, because the nitty-gritty details will never make it to a journal article. But you may not remember 2 years later after you've done a study why you did what you did. But if you've written it down as you were doing the study, or right after you've finished collecting your data, you have those notes to go back to, and should you need them. So a results section, also very disciplinary specific, can be anywhere from like 2 to 5 to 10 paragraphs, right? And it will vary quite a lot depending on if you're a quantitative or a qualitative researcher. One thing to keep in mind is you don't need to report all possible findings in your results section. Don't omit findings that disprove your results, right? That you don't want to commit academic fraud, but you want to present results that tell a story or answer a question that you've asked, right? And you don't want to answer a question that you, in the results section, that you haven't posed as what this manuscript is about. So be parsimonious, focus on the results that relate to the specific research question or questions or hypotheses that that manuscript addresses. And you want to describe your findings in a logical sequence, right? So often you start with describing participants. If you do that kind of human subject-based research, you start with the participants, or your, if it's not participants, whatever it is. And then you go to descriptive analyses, to the more sophisticated analyses. And use tables wherever you can to give you more space to write. But don't duplicate fully what is in, if you put something in a table, you can refer the reader to the table, and don't write out all of the results that are in the table. It's boring and dull. It's a waste of words sometimes. The introduction also can vary greatly from 2 to 10 paragraphs. If you think in some journals, there may be even a skimpy 1 paragraph. If you think of a journal such as Social Science and Medicine, there might be 2 pages of introduction, because that's something that's important for that journal in terms of conceptual and theoretical development. It tends to be, I read this in some of the books that I've read about writing journal articles, that's the section most completely read and not skimmed for content. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I was reflecting on that. I was thinking, like, is that really true? I've been reading a lot of articles about the opioid crisis, and usually the first 2 paragraphs start the same. So I'm not so sure whether it's the most completely read content in your journal article or not, but it's important, right? Because you need to grab the reader. And you might reflect on my comment that, all the articles start with the same 2 paragraphs, and maybe the way to grab the reader is not to start in the same place as other writers have. But having said that, you want to make sure your opening paragraphs offer an overview of the problem, the theory, the question, and they convey the importance of the article. They want to tell the reader, like, come with me as I tell you this story, right? That's important, and tell them why it's important. Why is it crucial that they know about what you found? You want to describe also in the introduction existing theories, existing research, and how yours may fit within a particular paradigm, or how it extends the paradigm, or the like. And you want to identify gaps and controversies. Situate what your article is about. And then you want to end the introduction section by stating what your hypothesis is, your research questions, and or your purpose, depending on your discipline, how you structure those things. The discussion also varies in length, can be as short as 2 paragraphs, but is often between 4 to 8 paragraphs. Often we lean on summary, like a summary of our findings in the discussion, because discussions are hard to write. You have to reflect on what your findings are in relation to what other people have found. And so sometimes we lean too much in filling up the discussion with a summary. The discussion isn't where you summarize your findings. You may offer a very brief summary of what you have in results, but if most of what you write in your discussion, half of it is a summary, you're probably going to have problems with journal reviewers later on. So you want to highlight in the discussion section what's new and important from your work, what you learned. Compare your results with what others have found in the literature. You might want to point out what new dimension or what new finding you're adding, or how your results challenge conventional wisdom, if that's the case, right? If your findings are, different than everybody else's, you want to, explain why, or offer some suggestions of why you think your findings are different and why that's important. Depending on your discipline, you might want to explain the implications of your study for policy or practice or methods or whatever's relevant. You have to acknowledge your limitations. There's always a limitation section in a research article, as there is in a proposal, but don't discount your work. All research has limitations. You want to think about, so maybe I didn't have the best response rate, or maybe, you know, my sample size was small, or, you know, something, but you want to think about, well, that may be true, but what else can be learned, right, from your findings? So don't, you know, talk about every limitation and basically convince the reader not to trust what you've written. Okay, so the abstract is often considered the most important section of a journal article. So some people say, as the quote says, for the vast majority of readers, the paper does not exist beyond its abstract. So abstracts are important because that's the first thing you read when you do your literature search. You're looking through the abstracts to say, is this manuscript going to offer me anything for what I'm looking for? So it's important to take your time with the abstract. Each journal has their own set of criteria, so you need to check the author instructions. They're usually between 200 to 250 words, sometimes longer, not often all that much shorter, but sometimes shorter. And they have specific sections. You need to find out what those are and use the proper titles. This is what I do for my abstracts. I write the abstract after everything else is written, right? I save the manuscript in a new name, and I slowly edit out content until I have enough for the abstract. I like doing that because it preserves terms and phrases and numbers, and then I'm not worried that, you know, I've lost a decimal, or I've changed a term, which, you know, in some pieces will be important. One of my co-authors hates that approach. And whenever I do it, she tells me she doesn't like it. And if I'm the first author, I just don't care because I think it's important. I recently had a reviewer trash my manuscript for this approach. But so, like, I've written a lot of articles, or I've been part of a lot of articles, and this method works for me, and I recommend it to you if it works for you. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So the keywords. So then you have to pick the keywords. And so it's important to do your homework about keywords. Look for manuscripts that have similar content and see what keywords they use. When you upload to a journal for consideration, you're going to have to give them some keywords. And select keywords that will be picked up in searches, right? Because you want your manuscript to be found. So make sure you do your homework about the keywords. So good titles. As I said, you know, quite a few slides ago, you don't start with the title. The title is one of the last things you do, at least I think it is. And what's a good title? It's simple, it's accurate. Some people say it's the most read aspect of a publication, right? If you think about journal searching, you know, you're looking at the titles first to see if the title even conveys some relevance. And if not, you're down, you know, to looking at the next item that's picked up on your search. It's the first thing that's screened by systematic reviews. So keep that in mind in terms of making sure your title is understandable and complete enough that it conveys the content of your journal article. So you have to balance generality with specificity. And so I do a lot of qualitative research and catchy. We often try to use, you know, quotes from some of our interviews in our titles because they're catchy, right? But catchy titles are great when they make sense, right? But they are not great when they're forced. So be careful about catchy titles. Be careful about boring titles that drone on. There's some kind of balance in between those two in terms of getting a good title. To help you with writing, you might use, there are lots of existing tools, right? So here, is the Prisma checklist. Maybe I should have updated that, but, it tells you all the things that need to be in your journal article, right? And so you can make sure that you have included all the things that you need to include in the journal article so you don't miss something. So there are different things you can do to push you forward your writing, right? So here are some things you can do in a short period of time. You can search for references, but don't get stuck doing that. You can read some background literature, but also, it should be in the service of your writing, not in the service of avoiding writing, right? Compile your reference list. Sometimes, you're stuck in a particular aspect of writing of your article, and maybe it's time to go and ask somebody about it. So maybe you schedule a meeting, or when we can actually go and talk to each other again, face to face in our offices. Maybe you walk down the hall and you talk to your supervisor, your colleague, or whatever, and ask them a question in a shorter period of time. You can format your manuscript and identify potential journal articles. So those are some of the things you can do in short periods of time. What are you going to do with longer periods of time? You need to, as I said earlier, organize and schedule this and protect it. Make sure other things don't encroach on it. Set priorities, write a to-do list for what you want to accomplish in that time. And, stay focused and avoid distractions. So that may mean staying home or going to the library. I never write in the library. All I want to do is get out of there, right? So that's the worst place for me. But I do write well at home, which is a good thing because I'm at home a lot these days. Anyway, you might want to, as I said earlier, turn your ringer off, your email chime, put a sign on your door, tell your staff to stay away. So when I'm back in my office, sometimes what I do, I have a window in my office door. And if I'm writing there and not at home, I put my coat over the window. So nobody can really see if I'm there or not. So if someone knocks and I don't answer, they don't feel offended, right? That I haven't answered them. And I can feel like I actually don't have to answer the door because now is my writing time. Anyway, figure out how you're going to avoid distractions. When you're done your writing time, whatever length you've chosen, make sure you keep note of what you've done and what needs to be done. So it's easier to pick up where you stopped, right? Because if you don't do that, then you may have to, retrace your steps and you'll use up all your writing time trying to figure out where you left off. So leave yourself some notes to tell yourself what to do next. So one of my colleagues in the office used to talk to me about writing retreats, and she'd go on these writing retreats. And so I said to another colleague of mine that I do a lot of writing with, or we were trying to do a lot of writing. We did a lot of research together. I was like, how are we going to produce more manuscripts? So we tried these writing retreats, and the first two were not so good. We were chit-chatted too much. We were too busy going out for lunch because we went somewhere off-site, and we weren't done, even though trying a retreat, even though we had failed twice to do it. The last time we did it, we just did it, the two of us. We didn't take a team. We stayed in my building at U of T, but we went to a different room. We stayed in the same room together, and we would do these bursts of an hour where we wouldn't allow each other to talk to each other. And then we'd stop, and then we'd talk to each other because we were writing on the same project. And that tended to work very well for us. And if it wasn't COVID time, we'd probably still be doing that and writing some more. There are lots of different methods. If you Google writing methods that you might want to try, some are Pomodoro, one's called To Write or Die, or 750 words. They come with timers and the like, and you might give it a try, to help you if you're struggling with getting your habit of writing up and going. So here's just a little segue into the next section. So it's a writer's block. You put it on top of your desk and then you can't write there anymore. So no, that's a different way of thinking about writer's block. So what do you do if you have writer's block? I have writer's block. My colleagues have writer's block. had writer's block when I was an undergrad, a PhD student, and a faculty member. It happens, right? But writer's block is, you can overcome it. So you need to analyze what's going on and don't be gentle, right? With yourself. Kind, but maybe not so gentle. Do you have writer's block because you've hit a difficult section or a time? I struggle with writing the theory sections of my articles. I hate writing about theory. If you're one of my graduate students, I didn't say that. Sometimes, you know, you may need to read more. You're stuck because actually you didn't fully understand the situation, the concept, the framework, or whatever. So maybe you need to read a little bit more, or read how other people write about it, whatever it is, so you can get an easier flow of words or the logic or whatever. But make sure that you don't get stuck there, right? That you know, your writer's block that you turned into reading more then became, you know, more of a writer's block because, you know, you've decided that you can't stop reading because you don't know enough. Sometimes it's important to discuss with your supervisor or colleague. I say maybe. Sometimes, you know, you may be discussing your writer's block and you're more commiserating than you are struggling. Some of you may wonder, why would I ever tell my supervisor I've hit writer's block? Depends on your supervisor, but it may be really important to talk to your supervisor because he, she, or they may have experienced as well, and they may have some really good tips to help you get out of your writer's block, right? So don't be afraid to talk about it, because people have, you know, it's a common thing, writer's block, right? But you know, you need to get out of it. Sometimes you have problems in your life, right? And that's why you have writer's block that's stopping you from writing, right? Maybe you need to give yourself a break. And that's a good idea, right? Like maybe something very profound has happened in your life and you just need a break. And so take your break, but make sure you schedule your next writing session within a time frame that makes sense, right? So you can kind of get back into the swing of things. And if it's a, you know, persistent problem, accept that writing is a struggle. I have, right? I know I'm going to struggle. I know sometimes I'm going to hate writing because I sometimes hate writing. But, you know, you have to push through it. You have to be kind of zen about it and just get on with things, right? Because it's important to your career. You know, some of you have probably seen this graphic. You know, this is, you know, a reflection of what it's like to go through peer review with your journal articles. You know, you run the gauntlet and you hope you survive, you know, all of the hits that are coming your way through the reviewers. So here's, I'll just give you a sense of, you know, some of the comments I've received. So these are the nastiest review. Well, no, there's some of the nastier comments I've received on a journal article. If the authors were interested in a qualitative study, they should have designed a proper one. I remember when I read that, when it came to me online, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody wrote that about my article. And in the same article, another reviewer said, I question the generalizability of the study. So after I swore, I was, you know, deeply wounded. I thought, okay, so obviously I'm not going to walk away, right? You know, from this journal article just because I don't like what, you know, the reviewer had to say. So this is how we answered this, the first one, which is, so we were writing for the American Journal of Public Health, and the style of the manuscript was a public health vignette. So it wasn't a study, it was describing a practice, right? So that's what we said to the reviewer. This manuscript was a public health vignette for the American Journal of Public Health. We even put in like the hyperlink that showed, you know, where to find the author guidelines for public health vignettes, the goal of which is to describe a novel program, public health program or intervention. You know, we referred the author, the reviewer back to the guidelines, and we mentioned, and with respect to the second comment, that all hospitals in North America see patients who inject drugs and may be at risk of HIV and overdose. because their point was basically, like, how many of these patients can actually be in a hospital, and why should we even consider this issue in a hospital? So that's how we answered it politely. So, you may get unhelpful comments like that, mean-spirited. For the most part, you won't, right? And you have to think about, how am I going to answer the comments I get back from the viewers? So your journal article goes in, some usually anonymous reviewers review it. They give you some comments, goes to the editor. The editor most often does not decide, just sends you all the reviewer comments, even though they should probably curate them. And then you have to figure out, how am I going to respond and in what ways to these comments? How am I going to change my article? So there's lots of different opinions about how to respond. So the first is be humble and polite. So I may not have liked what that reviewer said about, I basically had a shitty study. But, I still needed to reflect on what was written and also answer in a polite way. We always thank the editors and reviewers for their time and effort, because almost undoubtedly, even though we may not like some of their stupid comments, or sometimes they're incorrect, right? But, for the most part, every review I've gotten has improved the quality of my paper, right? Do what the editor asks you to do. If the editor asks you to do something, you almost always do it, right? Like if the editor has taken the time to go through all the reviewer comments and said, I want you to address, 2, 4, and 10, you do it, right? Because failure to do that will mean your article will be rejected, right? Probably. So be humble, be polite, and do what the editor asks of you. Unless there's some reason that you really object to what the editor is saying, right? It's just plain wrong, then maybe you need to move to a different journal. Resubmit, that won't be fun. But anyway, you can disagree with what the reviewers say. But if you're disagreeing with every comment by a reviewer, you need to think about, am I just being defensive, right? Like, am I just like too pig-headed and I can't stand the thought that, my work might not be perfect? If that's the case, you need to have a bit of a reality check. So, you can disagree with some of the comments, but not all of them. You need to think through them, right? So I don't know how to say properly, so we'll call that person Pazit, who says, the author may not agree with a comment. This is the essence of the scientific debate, a natural part of the business, right? So you don't have to agree with it, all of them, but you do have to consider them. Be specific about the comment when you're writing your response to the reviewers, what the comment is and what your response to it is. So I'll get to, I was going to show you my example. So make sure that you don't forget to make the changes to the manuscript. So sometimes you're writing the letter, the response letter that says, we're going to do, this was the comment and this is how we're responding to it. Sometimes you forget to actually go to the manuscript and fix the manuscript. So don't forget that, right? Because if you do, it'll come back to you. And don't forget to remove any, what I would call within team comments. So as I said before, sometimes when I get reviews I don't like, I swear, I make disparaging remarks about the reviewer to my colleagues to make myself feel better and the like, and then I get over myself and I get on with it, right? Because, as I said, I benefit from what the reviewers have to say almost always. So we had one reviewer who sent us more pages of comments than the actual manuscript. Maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but it's close. And I was annoyed, and we had spent days writing response to the reviewer to get our manuscript published. And so I wrote in, as we were sending the document back and forth, something about, when we answered one particular comment, that we should spank the reviewer, that's what I wrote, for, you know, an incorrect comment about the methods. And then when I uploaded the response to the reviewers into the journal system, I forgot, well, I uploaded the wrong version of the response to the reviewers that still had that comment about spanking the reviewer. So anyway, the journal editor was very kind to me and sent it back. And they wrote, I'm going to send this back to you to submit the appropriate version, not because I think it is really required, but because there are some internal conversations that I don't really think were meant to be in the submitted document. I am sorry, but I just don't think that some of the comments need to be on the record. So remember to make your changes and remember to get rid of idiotic comments if you are like me and petty and maybe a bit childish sometimes, when responding to reviewers. Okay, so when I respond to reviewers' comments, this is what ours looks like. On the left is all the reviewer comments that we got. And here is our response. It's really easy for the reviewers to say, this is what I said, and this is what they're saying to it. And also for the editors to see. So, the first one is include a sentence early in introduction that highlights the needle and syringe program name, diversity, and notes that all these programs, yada, yada. So, the text was revised as recommended, the first sentence of the introduction, and then we put it in italics. So it's easy for the reviewer to find it, and then they can find it in the manuscript as well. Not everybody writes their responses like that, but that works for me. And I find it when you have multi-authored publications, and I'm working with a lot of students and postdocs, that this format works because it's easy to keep track of and not lose, make sure you miss, make sure that you don't miss a comment. If I were doing this workshop in person, I would ask, raise your hand if you've ever had a journal article rejected. So I've done this workshop before at the CAR conference, and there would be many hands raised. So yeah, if you're at home watching this, raise your hand if you've had a journal article rejected. And yeah, it's common. So it's a common experience to all who publish. You expect it and learn to accept it. You may not like it, may annoy you, anger you, all kinds of things. But it's important to lick your wounds, complain to your colleagues, and then move on. Don't lose out on the effort you put into the work, right? Just because your article gets rejected by one journal doesn't mean it isn't going to get accepted anywhere else. Never walk away from a manuscript, right? If it gets rejected on your first try, keep trying. Read the reviews carefully, identify what's usable, helpful, false, because even if they reject it, unless you get a desk reject, which means your article goes in and then they don't even review it, that's going to happen to you. Probably. But in that case, submit it somewhere else quickly. If you get the reviews, if it goes to the review and you get the reviews and they still reject it, read through, use it as an opportunity to improve your manuscript and then resubmit it. Don't, if you get the reviews, don't just submit it again, right? Make sure you use what you can to improve your chances of being accepted somewhere else. Very occasionally, so like I said, I've been an independent scientist for 20 years now. I think on 3 occasions, we've said, no, actually, we really want the editor to reconsider. And we have been successful twice. 3 times we tried to say, really, did you really mean to reject us? This is why we think, the rejection was improper, our journal article actually fits, and, we have been successful. But you can't do that all the time. Editors don't have time for that, or the patients, right? What's important to remember, so, you're going to spend a lot of time probably talking about your rejections, but you also need to celebrate your successes, right? You get a paper accepted, tell your friends, tell your parents, tell your partner, tell your colleagues, right? Maybe go out for a beer or a tea or whatever, and celebrate them, because, these are major accomplishments in our careers. And, a lot of work goes in before you actually get something in print or online, and you need to remember that and celebrate it. I write for in the gray literature for lay audiences a lot. because of the kind of work I do, not everyone who needs to know what I'm writing about or, can access it because they don't have access to scientific journals. And sometimes the way we format things or the way we write for scientific audiences, includes what some of my community colleagues call, boring details. I don't really want to read all that stuff, Carol. And sometimes people don't have time to read a 20-page article or a 10-page article, but they may have time to read, a fact sheet or a blog post or something, right? So you might want to consider repackaging your work for other venues, summaries, plain language summaries and the like, newsletters, blogs, or whatever. If you work in a community-based research framework, you probably are writing for in the gray literature and your lay audiences first, and then you're using that material to convert into academic products, right? Depends on the framework that you use, but it's important to keep that in mind. If you're a CBR researcher, you're writing this stuff probably first, right? And then you're going back to your academic outputs. The gray literature can be really, really important, right? So this is my most famous knowledge product ever, right? We've had 120,000 downloads of this document, parts 1 and 2, over, I don't know, like a 7-year period. It's important for the practice of harm reduction. So, depending on what kind of research you do, your biggest impact may not be in the academic literature. It may be in the gray literature. And at least that is the case for me. That, I will never outdo this in terms of impact. I don't think in my own career, this best practice document. And it's been very important. And, you might want to think about, how to repackage your work for that kind of audience and format. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I make a few comments about theses and dissertations. So there are lots of books. There's one that one of my former grad students told me she read, Surviving Your Stupid Decision to Go to Grad School. I think it's kind of funny. And I remember having that exact same thought and doing a master's degree. And then later with a PhD, it was like, why did I give up my good government job? I had a nice salary for this, torture. Anyway, it all worked out in the end. So there are lots of books and tips and blogs to help you get through. And, pick one that works. Don't, read 10 of them. You don't need to read 10 of them. Maybe read 1 or 2, find something that works for you. When you're writing your thesis or your dissertation, whatever title you want to give it, you have to strive for excellence, right, in your work, but not perfectionism, because you can get stuck there and never get your writing out, right? Make sure you set deadlines and keep them. Meet regularly with your supervisor. And if your supervisor's elusive, be persistent, right? Because your supervisors are there to help you. And, if you can start a practice of, meeting with your supervisor once a month, more or less as you need, but don't disappear from your supervisor or your committee, because they'll help you with the conduct of your project and also your writing, right? Get feedback and don't be afraid to ask for it. The first drafts of anything, of a chapter of a thesis or your proposal, are usually bad. And that's the process, right? You go from like crappy, boring, repetitive writing to, really stylistic, impactful writing, the further you get in your career. Right even when you don't feel like it, you got to get through your graduate school, right? So, or your other, whatever training you're doing. And if you don't write, you only write when you feel like it, you're going to be slow in the process, right? And remember to look after yourself in this whole process. Remember to eat, rest, do things that you love, and to stay healthy and focused, right? Because writing a dissertation can be a grim process. So here are a few assorted last tips about writing. Work with colleagues who will write and review. So I used to work, I'm at U of T now, I used to work somewhere else. And I had nice colleagues. And I had nice colleagues on my projects, but they didn't really like to write. And some of them didn't really see the value of writing all that much. And then when I moved to U of T, I started working with one particular colleague and then other colleagues. And, my productivity, skyrocketed. I started writing with my students, with my colleagues, and, we got into the practice of writing, and that's really helped. So if you write with people who don't like to write, you're probably not going to write a lot. So find people that like to write. Find an approach, a method, time, or location that works for you. Change it whenever, when it stops working for you. And remember that, depending on where you are in your stage of life, your approach may be, that I'm going to set aside 4 days now and I'm going to knock out that paper, right? But then you become a parent or a partner, or you're, on a tenure track, or, you're taking care of, members of your family or whatever, right? And that isn't going to work anymore, because there's no way, you have 4 days, that to set aside for writing. So you need to find a new approach. It's not that you can't write, you just need to find a new way to write. Be sure to be a good colleague and deliver. So what does that mean? If you're asked to be on someone's manuscript, make sure you actually deliver. You write what they ask you to write, or you review, you provide constructive comments, because you're likely to be asked again. And there's all kinds of teams that you might get the opportunity to work with over time if you're a good colleague, but if you're a bad colleague, people won't recommend you and they won't ask you again. So, remember that. Ask trusted mentors and colleagues to review your papers. Sometimes, you just get stuck, or you're not sure if it's ready to go or whatever. So ask someone you trust to take a look at and trust in the sense that they'll provide you with good feedback, right? And they won't seek to destroy you, and they also won't seek to just tell you nice things. Oh, it's a good manuscript, when actually probably needs 4 more days work. So get people to review who you trust. Be careful not to plagiarize, including yourself. And if you're working with someone writing that you've never worked with before, I just say be cautious about that. If you don't know their practice, I had a colleague who wrote with people that they didn't really know, and it turned out after an article got published that the section written by the new partners was plagiarized. And wow, it was quite a to-do. And so just be careful about that. If you're reading something with somebody new that's like just too perfect, maybe you want to see if you can find it somewhere else, right? Discuss authorship and order from the beginning. So I recently made a mistake with one of my own students about not talking about authorship order, and they ended up disappointed, and that was my mistake. Authorship can be tricky business to talk about when you're more junior, but if you're going to be, you might want to know before you put in all the effort where you're going to be. And maybe being in the middle is okay if you put in a lot of effort because you don't have a lot of journal articles, right? But maybe it's not, right? Maybe you just rather write your own papers, right? But you might want to get a sense of where you're going to be in the author order. If you're writing with other people, be kind and firm about your deadlines, right? So sometimes depending, on the manuscript that we're writing, I'll say, if we don't hear from you by May, we'll assume you're no longer interested. I don't do that very often, but every now and then you just have someone who's not going to answer, right? And so you need to, say, thank you for your contributions, but, you're not going to be an author because you haven't met the criteria for authorship. So there, as I said, there's lots of resources. Those are 3 books, and all the publishers have resources that can be of use to you. So I wish I was, delivering this in person, because I like to talk to people about their writing and the struggles they have and the successes they have. Anyway, I hope that you get something good out of this, and I hope I get to meet you at some point at one of the CAR conferences. Thanks very much.